Hey Ray, how's it going? Thanks for coming in. Love and appreciate you. How's your head? Love the repost and the and everything. Woo! Were you here last week, Ray? I think you were here last week, weren't you? I haven't talked to you in a while. How's the job going? How's mom? And how are you? Woo! Oh, somebody else popped in. Say hey. Thanks for coming in. Love and appreciate you. How's your head? Oh, we're gonna read. Man, I got the yawnies tonight. We're gonna read from Callahan's Crosstime Saloon tonight, and tonight's buzz brought to you by Cresco brand, and this one is pretty good. What is it? Green line. It's the name of the flower. But it is, I picked it up because it is specifically for this reason. It is 37.73% THCA. It's good stuff. And it's got a pretty good buzz to it. I am nice and happily stoned and ready for the read. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming in. Love and appreciate you. How's your head? How's your heads? Oh, nice. You're a little buzzed, Ray? That's the way to be. Life is a pain in the ass. Robert, 37%. Yes. Last Druid, how's it going, buddy? Thanks for coming in. Love and appreciate you. How's your head? Well, Robert, that's according to the to whoever tests it in Pennsylvania. Um, occasionally, these things THCA. Um, occasionally, these things they do sell things that reach up into that level. I think the highest I purchased over the many years was probably 41%, I think. Yes, Robert, that's flour, buddy. Yep, that is flour, my friend. Uh, yep. Sorry, got distracted there for a second. But the other, I also have concentrate, and it is something rainbow. Gabrielle, how's it going? Thanks for coming in. Love and appreciate you. How's your head? If you're new to me, please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And if you like the sound of my voice, you're going to listen to me um, and listen to me read. Tonight, we are doing Callahan's Crosstime Saloon. Um, but I read other things. I read Little Blue books. If you're not familiar with them, that's not the children's books. These are Little Blue books. They were published in Garrard, Kansas in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s when they were most popular into the 50s. And they cover the gambit of subjects from Shakespearean plays to how to be a bricklayer and typewrite and teach yourself French and German and mathematics and just the gambit of information and oh, what's my neck tattoos? They're just pieces of flash that I used to work in a tattoo shop. No, I didn't do tattoos. I used to clean up, clean the stations, clean the shop, and I got paid in tattoos, and that's how I got a lot of my tattoos. But yeah, that's my just Hellcats. They were cool looking. One's got a 13 and a cigar, and the other one's I forget what the other one's got on it. It's been so long. Hey, dudes in the house, thanks for coming in, brother. Love and appreciate you. How's your head? All right. Let's see. All right. So we're gonna go with the concentrate. Gabriel. Gabriel. Yeah, Gabrielle. They are Pair, Pair, Pair Eyewear. I love them because they're interchangeable. They have these toppers to them, and they're held on by magnets. They're great. I've used them now for 3 years, I believe. Yeah, it's been 3 years that I've had Pair Eyewear, and I've got lots of tops, and they've got all kinds. They run the gambit during the holidays, so I uh, um, St. Patty's Day and Easter are the ones coming up. So I'm glad you like them. Thanks. I really do like them because you can change them up. I'm a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, so they have two different ones that are Pirates, and oh, the tattoos. I just seen your um, but yeah, the glasses are great. Pair Eyewear. Go check them out. Uh, Robert, the question about the tattoos. It's the strangest experience I've had in tattoos, and I've got them like on my arms and legs and one or two on my chest. Um, the one side was like the easiest tattoo I think I've ever had. It didn't. I mean, it was just I laid there and it didn't really bother at all. The other side was the absolute worst tattoo I've ever experienced in my life, and I I could not barely stand that he when he put the outline down, and it was the same person did both sides. It's just the strangest thing I'd ever experienced in tattoos, from my personal experience. And in fact, the I think it's this side. Yep, it's this side because one side just looks like it's just not quite as crisp in the line. It was crazy. They used a numbing cream for the coloring, and it still was just almost unbearable. It was crazy. Oh, thanks, dude. Yeah, I have a raven on the back of my leg that is a cover up. That dude, my buddy there, Sanjuro is speaking about. Uh, I got it tattooed in what was that 2021 I think, and uh, I went to a tattooist in Fenton, Michigan, Pinky, and I met her on TikTok, and then she did the cover up, and it's a raven, a two-headed raven sitting, yeah, standing on a skull that is sitting on a stack of books, and with the old time banner going across that says "Nevermore." It's a beautiful tattoo. But she did it. We broadcast it live on TikTok, and I think we were on Instagram too at the time. But yeah, um, the the latest one I've gotten was like 2 years ago. It's that little shell that a friend got. I went out to visit meet a friend in Oceanside, California. We got matching tattoos, and then I got one up here out there too. But yeah, the older I get, the more painful. Although I definitely get the itch. Definitely get the itch for more work. There's a few different design types that I would like to get done that I like. There's the one that just they look like patches. It looks like a sewn on patch, but it's not. It's a tattoo. I think they're pretty cool. But thanks for the likes, guys. If you're new to me, please go and subscribe to my YouTube channel and come back. We're gonna start reading here. I'm gonna start reading here in about 2 minutes. Um, and in that time, dude, I got the new fridge, and I like it. They got it in quick and easy. It's not as big as the other one, but that's okay. It's a one-man show here. It holds all the stuff I need in it. Keeps my Ben and Jerry's ice cream frozen. My ice cubes for my ice bong frozen. So everything's good. It doesn't give me the whine of death like the old refrigerator was. The appliance wine of death rattle. That must have been so annoying that two people dropped out. Oh, pardon me. All right, are we 10:09? All right, we're just about ready here, guys. I think I'm going to try and put up the human origin of morals, maybe another chapter of it, maybe tonight or tomorrow. I don't know. I've been getting back into Diablo 4 again, so. Yeah, it is like white noise, except it's a little more annoying. White noise would be I don't mind. This is just the appliance was dying, the refrigerator was dying. It took 2 days to freeze a tray of ice cubes. So it was telling me I'm dying, and it was leaving little puddles of water on the floor. Like it couldn't hold its bladder anymore. Organs were shutting down, man. So I ordered one refrigerator, and like a dumbass, I didn't measure my little hallway here that leads to my nipples itchy. Oh, that's scary, isn't it? That leads to my kitchen, and of course the one I ordered first didn't fit, so it had to go back like a dumbass. And then I ordered one that day, another one to replace it, and I made sure it fit down my hallway. And so now I've got my nice new fridge. Oh yeah, yeah. So I don't know. See it was here when I moved in. I moved into this apartment 2 years ago, and the refrigerator was here. And I live in Pennsylvania, so landlords don't have to supply any appliances. And mine generally doesn't. My landlord, they're great though. I have incredibly cheap rent. But I so I got a free refrigerator for at least the first 2 years. So can't complain about that. So, all right, where we at? Oh, yeah, 10:11. All right, sorry, guys, I digress. We're getting ready here. I think I'm going to read like a paragraph before, because I looked here and I'm like, wow, I don't even understand. I don't know where I left off. So, all right, here we go. Everybody, Callahan's Crosstime Saloon. And I'm pretty sure we're in the midst of Tall Tales Night at Callahan's. So here we go. A cheer went up, and Callahan made a ferocious face at me as he drew a draft bud. Not that Grandfather Stonebender's legendary success was surprising, I continued smoothly, as he was born with 3 heads. His mother was frightened by a pawn shop while she was carrying him. Doctor was so startled he swore off the sauce. And the child raised up such a fuss crying 3 ways at once that they sent him home early, where he caused his mother some unforeseen and unprecedented difficulties with nursing. 3-headed baby, 2 udders. That's a problem. Pardon me. Man, them vapes sneak up on me. Fortunately, he matured quickly and found early employ as the before, during, and after for hair tonic commercials. Clever. Which always kept him in hair tonic, at least. For too long, though, his combined IQ had brought him the prominence he deserved in several unrelated fields, and he passed his weekends doing a trio at the local gin mill for relaxation. His sex life was something incredible. His prenatal trauma also having left him with 3, well, But that's neither here nor there anyway. I should be talking about, point is, he wasn't no looser than Doc's cousin Hobart, reduced to geeking in sideshows for a living. Grandfather Stonebender lived entirely off his wits. Had to keep himself in neckties. But the same strange fate that provided him with 3 times the brains and earning power of a normal man carried with it the seeds of his destruction. He fell prey to the committee syndrome. One day he was debating free silver with himself. It was a burning issue at the time, and sad to say, he lost. This made him so mad he punched himself right in the mouth and broke several teeth and a knuckle. Being a gentleman, he had no alternative. He challenged himself to a duel. Next morning, acting as second for both sides so as to keep it in the family, he shot himself in the right eye from point-blank range and died. Papers were full of it at the time. Of course, if you read the only daily round, you know the papers are still full of it. But anyhow, that's how my grandfather Stonebender passed on. From the past on. Doc Webster's mouth hung open in astonishment. But Callahan again called for the moral before the general outrage could begin. Just goes to show, I explained, that three heads are better than none. I closed my eyes and waited for the Holocaust, smugly sure that I would have to rely on cheap gags to get free beer any more tonight. But the silence was broken not by groans, but by a single groan. And the pain in that groan was not put on at all. It came from the open doorway across the room, and as we all spun round, we beheld a sandy-haired young man, shockingly disheveled, leaning against the doorframe and sobbing. As we watched, frozen, he slid from its support and fell full length into Callahan's, landing on his face with a crash. Somehow, I knew intuitively that I was not a winner tonight after all. For all his bulk, Doc Webster was the first to reach the newcomer. He rolled him over and began doing doctor things, almost before the rest of us had started to move, and swung his great black bag in a lethal circle when we crowded too close. Nobody ignores pain in Callahan's place, but I guess sometimes we're a hair too eager to help. The kid wasn't much older than Tommy Jansen, maybe 25 or so, but you had to look past the haunted lines of his face to see it. At first glance, he might have been 30 or better, and the expression he'd worn before he passed out would have looked more at home on a man 80 years old and tired of living. His eyes were set in close against a hooking nose, and his cheeks were broad enough to make his mouth seem a shade too small. His lips were the kind of full that isn't especially sensual, and his frame had just a bit more meat than it needed. His clothes seemed to have been pulled on in the dark in a hell of a hurry, fly unzipped, shirt only half partially tucked in, and buttons unmatched with holes. Furthermore, he was dressed for June, and it was a particularly rainy March out. He was soaked clear through, hair that looked usually brushed back lying limply across half his face. It looked like he'd gotten to Callahan's just in time. His upper cheeks and temples were livid with purple bruises, and his knuckles were swollen. Doc Webster searched his hair and found more contusions beneath. "Looks like somebody gave this poor bastard an awful beating," the doc announced. The kid's eyes opened. "'Twas me," he said feebly, swallowing something foul. Someone fed the doc a glass of straight rye, and he tipped a little of it into the kid's mouth. It seemed to help. Color came back to his pasty face, and he tried to get up. The doc told him to lie quiet, but the kid shook him off and made it as far as the first table, where he fell into a chair and looked around groggily. He didn't seem to notice us, but whatever he was expecting to see scared him silly. It wasn't there. He relaxed some. Callahan was already piling corned beef sandwiches in front of him, and the table happened to have a pitcher of somebody's beer already on it. throwing us all a grateful glance. Seeing us this time, he fell on the food like the wolves upon the centerfold, and he got outside of 3 sandwiches in short order, washing them down with great draughts of beer. When he was done, he looked Callahan squarely in the eye. "I don't have any money to pay you," he said. "I didn't figure you did," Callahan agreed. "Go on, eat up." They were getting stale. "These bums here, they don't eat, as far as I can tell. You can owe me," he pronounced. "More food." "Thanks. I'm okay now, I think. For a while." The doc wanted to get something straight. "You put them bruises on your own head, young feller?" "Jim McDonald, doctor." "Yes, I put most of them there." "I'll bet it felt good when you stopped," Long Drink said, and immediately regretted it. "I wouldn't want Doc Webster's mass balanced on my toe either." "If it did, I might stop more often," McDonald said, with a ghost of a grin, wincing at the sudden pain in his temples. "Lately, it's the most fun I have." "Want to talk about it?" Callahan suggested delicately. "Sure, why not? You'll never believe me anyhow. No one would." McDonald's grin was gone now. Callahan drew himself up and registered wounded dignity. "Son, this here is tall tale night at my place, and I am prepared to believe anything you can say with a straight face. Hell, I sometimes believe the doc over there, and his face ain't never been straight. Come on, spit it out. Maybe you won't owe me for them sandwiches and beer after all." The big Irishman put a fresh light on his ever-present El Ropo and gave the kid a fresh beer to lube his mouth with. I looked around. The boys were reverting to their favorite listening postures as naturally and gracefully as Paladin used to go into the gunfighter's crouch of his. The hell with the budget. I decided and slapped another single in the bar, helped myself to a shot of Irish douchebag from the bottle labeled "Give Every Man His Due." "It started with my brother Paul," McDonald began, and I groaned inside. The perfect shaggy relative story shot to hell. He was 10 years older than me, and he was really only my half-brother. Dad divorced and remarried when Paul was only 3, and that's why I had some hope for a while. You see, Paul was a mutant. Not in any gross physical sense. His body was not malformed in any detectable way. But he was an instantaneous echo. You've probably heard of them. Maybe seen one on TV or read about them in places like Charles Fort. From the age of 12, Paul could mimic anything you said at the instant that you said it. The voice and inflection were different, but he never stumbled, even when he didn't comprehend the words he was parroting. No noticeable time lag. He simply said what you were saying as you said it. Sometimes he actually seemed to jump the gun by a hair, and that was really strange. Around the time that I was 5, a couple of fellows from Duke came around with a truck full of equipment and put Paul through a series of tests. At first, they were quite excited, but as the testing continued, their excitement wore off, and eventually they told my father that Paul was just like all the other instant echoes they'd studied, simply a man who'd learned how to hook his mouth in parallel with his ears. According to their newest findings, he could not, in fact, jump the gun. And he sometimes seemed to, as he sometimes seemed to. And while the actual lag was small, they claimed to be able to measure it. They were unhappy. They'd hoped to prove that Paul was a telepath. Me, I think he got cagey. Paul had always been an introspective kid, and about that time he became moodier than ever. He seldom left the house, and when he did, he was quite likely to return in tears, claiming a migraine as a cause. My father got our doctor to prescribe some strong stuff for the migraines, but it didn't seem to help for too long. Paul, having finished high school at 15 with excellent grades, showed no interest whatever in college, a job, or girls. He seemed to be the typical loner with a bit of hypochondria thrown in. It was about then that the trouble started between my father and mother, Paul's stepmother, you understand. She felt that Paul had to earn a living regardless of his headaches, and insisted that he should do so at sideshows and on nightclub stages, doing his instant echo routine. Dad was having none of it. He made a good deal of money, with a good deal of hard work, running a used car chain, but he was perfectly willing to indulge a temperamentally infirm son, rather than sell him on a stage to be gawked at by yokels. Mother was not a very nice person, I'm afraid. And I suspect she thought of the child she had inherited as an untapped gold mine, scant years from his majority. I think she wanted Paul to make a bundle while she could still get at it. She'd always had some of the backstage mother complex. How I managed to remain neutral, I don't know. But then, nobody asked my opinion. When Paul was 20 and I was 9.5, I got my first big scare. It was all an accident, for by this time Paul had become uncannily adept at avoiding people, leaving the house only after dark and never straying far. The only spot he showed any affection for was the abandoned gravel pit a few miles from home, a place so gloomy at night that even the area's love-struck teenagers avoided it. I went there with him 2 or 3 times. Paul seemed to accept my company more than anyone else's, particularly when I was younger. I didn't especially care for the place myself. It seemed to me the loneliest place I'd ever imagined. But I suppose a kid will follow his big brother just about anywhere he's invited. Now I think I'll hydrate, kids. Cottonmouth. Mom and Dad were out that night at a PTA meeting or some such. I was watching TV. And if you want to know the truth, I was eating some stolen jelly beans from the hoard Mother used to hide away for herself. So when Paul came crashing through the front door, I jumped a foot in the air before I even saw him. When I got downstairs, my first crazy thought was that the migraines had finally split poor Paul's head open. He looked, well, I guess I've given you a pretty fair imitation tonight, crashing in here the way I did. His scalp was laid open around the sides of his head. His forehead was dripping blood in lines that streamed crazily over his face. His fingers were raw and bleeding, and his eyes held so much agony that even at 9 years old I was more terrified by them than anything else. Ooh, excuse me. He was babbling incoherently, swinging his arms wildly as if to ward off some closing demon and sobbing as though his heart would break. I'd never seen anyone in his age cry like that, you know. I rushed to his side and got him to sit down, and without thinking about it, I went to the bar and mixed him a martini, just as Mother had taught me to do for her. Little enough of it went down his throat, but it calmed him some, and the rest, at least, got some of the blood off his chin. Of course, when he'd calmed down a little, I asked him what had happened. "She looked so nice, Jimmy," he raved. "So nice. I thought it would be all right. I mean, I knew it would be bad, but I thought I could take it. She looked so goddamn nice." He shrieked, trembled like a leaf. Finally, I got the story out of him in bits and pieces. It seems my brother was a telepath after all. A latent telepath at any rate. From age 5 to 15, his only telepathic manifestation was his instant echo bit, and that was done unconsciously. Sub-vocalized thoughts must be closest to the surface. During that time, he never received thoughts except about those to be vocalized. Never sensed emotions, and never had any conscious violational control of his wild talent. But about midway through puberty, the picture began to change. His power was still beyond his control, but it grew. With no warning, he would suddenly find himself inside someone else's head, with increasing frequency and for increasing lengths of time. The first time he plugged in was for a split second only, just enough to scare him silly, and it didn't reoccur for a couple of months. By now, he told me, telepathy had came to him every week or so, for as much as 5 or 10 minutes at a time. You must understand, this was nothing like the traditional telepathy of science fiction stories. It was not the ability to send messages without speech. Paul had never succeeded in sending anything. Nor was it the ability to receive such messages. It was, rather, a process of entering the skull of another, receiving its entire contents, and perceiving them as a gestalt. I wonder if you can imagine what that's like. Perhaps if you've ever thought of telepathy at all, you've thought of how terrible it would be if someone were inside your strongest defenses, privy to all your secrets and desires and shameful memories and frustrated lusts and true feelings. Well, you might. But have you ever considered how terrible it would be to find yourself in someone else's head? With all that unsought and unwanted knowledge, as long as people remain locked in their own skulls, they should be. Because, as most people intuitively realize, the things that grow and fester in a sealed skull aren't always fit to share. On top of that, there's the sheer shock of directly confronting a naked ego as strong as your own. And Paul told me that night that it doesn't help a bit that the other ego is unaware of you. Most people never get over believing that they're the center of the universe, even when they know it isn't so. To have your nose rubbed in it is an unsettling thing. And so, Paul told me between sobs, he began avoiding people the best he could as his strange and terrifying power grew in him. Repeated exposure made the minds of his immediate family tolerable to him, and his telepathy seemed to be sharply limited by distance, with an effective radius of about 100 feet or so. By keeping strangers beyond that limit, Paul could achieve peace of a sort. The flashes of telepathy bringing him only glimpses of Dad, Mother, and myself. Dad he pitied with an intensity heretofore unknown to that emotion. Mother he hated beyond all understanding. And me, he often found soothing, until I grew up enough to start having dark secrets of my own. He told me some things about myself then that, but that's irrelevant. The point is, that night, communing with himself in the moonlit gravel pit, he met a girl, about his age or a little older. One of the strange things about out-of-the-way places is that, while you almost never meet anyone there, anyone you do run into is somehow very liable to be friend material. At any rate, she seemed to Paul the nicest and most gentle girl he'd ever seen in his life. Not at all like any other girl he'd ever met. She spoke softly, and only when she had something to say. And he felt in her a difference that he could not explain to me in words. Whatever the reason, he let down his guard for once, Instead of running away or driving her from him with rudeness, as he had learned to do with strangers, he stayed to talk. Before too many minutes had passed, he began to lose the usual terrifying fear that his wild talent would strike. Began to believe that it might be all right if it did begin, finally, to almost hope that it would. And it did. I'm sure she was a lovely girl, but the best of us harbor dark secrets, sometimes even from ourselves. I don't know specifically what shattered Paul that night, but I'm sure it was nothing that a bishop on his deathbed would have felt compelled to confess. Maybe it was nothing more dishonorable than her lifetime's accumulation of pain. For one's own sorrow may be bearable by its familiarity and yet staggering to a stranger. In any event, it hit Paul even harder than usual because he had dared to hope. Now, if your ears are overloaded, you can stuff your fingers into them. If your nose is outraged, you can hold it. If your eyes are blinded, you can shield them with your arm. But when your brain itself is overwhelmed by direct input, all you can do is smash it with a rock, hoping to drive the other consciousness away with your own. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it works. For Paul that night, it hadn't worked. Now, you must understand that I was very young. I barely comprehended the things that Paul was telling me. And if I understood what had happened, I surely didn't understand why it had hit him as hard as it obviously had. Being able to read minds had no drawback that my 9-year-old mind could see. I sure didn't know much about the human nature. But I was trying hard to emphasize with my big brother. That's the only explanation I have for what occurred. Because as Paul reached the terrible climax of his story, for one split second a shutter opened, and like a camera plate, my child's mind was imprinted with the total contents of the mind of my brother. It lasted only that split second, and it faded about as fast as a flashbulb burst from 2 feet away. The impact was over quickly. But the blinding after image seared my brain for many seconds more. I screamed several times. Instantly, our positions were reversed, and Paulie was holding me, restraining my hands. He knew at once what had happened, and the grim set of his jaw said that he had been expecting it for years now. "It's over," he barked. "Jimmy, listen to me. It's over. It won't happen again for months, maybe years." It wasn't what he said, but the pure joyous relief of how far away his voice sounded that cut through my child's terror and brought me back from the edge of hysteria. Why? Paulie was miles away. At least a foot. And there was confronting walls of bone, cartilage, and skin, and blessed empty air between us. I calmed down, and Paulie held me tightly in his arms, and in savage whispers explained to me what I was, what had happened to us, and what I could expect from now on. He had hoped, he said, that I would be spared because my maternal genes were different from his. He explained genetics to me, as well as it can be explained to a 9-year-old, and he told me what a mutant was. He told me how much easier to bear the telepathic flashes would become, and he told me how much easier they would not become. And he told me how much easier, he told me how often to expect the onslaught, flashing, he called it, and advised me on how to avoid flashing by avoiding sentient beings as much as possible. I suppose you could say it was the end of my childhood. I know that 4 years later, When my father haltingly undertook to explain the facts of life to me, they came as a hell of an anticlimax. I suppose the next landmark in this story is the night my father and I found Paul collapsed across my mother in the living room. The lamp that had crushed her skull still clutched in his hand. But I don't think I want to talk about that now. They took Paul away that night, like a sack of sugar, and hauled him off to Kings Park, completely catatonic. He's been that way ever since. As far as I can tell, he never flashed again. Or anything. That was 14 years ago. Wow, 14 years ago. That's pretty crazy. Callahan had been refilling his glass as he talked, but MacDonald spilled this one over half the table. He drank the rest as fast as it could pour and shut up. I get it, Vassetti said after a while. You're afraid the same thing's gonna happen to you. Jesus, Doc Webster said in an undertone behind me. He's just about due. I did some rapid mental calculations and turned pale. No, Eddie, I said aloud. Jim's overdue. Unless... I let it trail off. MacDonald grinned hideously, shook his head. No, friend, I haven't killed anyone yet. Though, I wouldn't care to make any predictions for tomorrow. No, my pattern didn't follow Paul's after all. Not precisely. That is, for one thing, I never was an instant echo. I waited all through adolescence for the next flash, and when it hadn't come by the time I graduated high school, I dared to begin to hope that I was different. By sophomore year in college, I'd shoved the fear back into the far corners of my mind and convinced myself that my one fleeting experience had been a freak, perhaps Paul sending instead of receiving for once. In junior year, it hit me again. In the middle of a party, I was paralyzed. There were 21 people there, and for an awful second I was sure my head would burst from overcrowding. I learned more about human nature that night than I had in the previous 20 years, and I very nearly died. I passed out eventually, but not before I'd gained an undeserved reputation as an acid head and lost my girlfriend. From that point on, they started coming again and again. The next flash was 6 months later, the next 4.5, then 5, then 3, then I stopped keeping track. Right now, I'd guess they hit every day or so. But I'm not sure. I can't tell you an awful lot about the time between them. His head dropped. Why do you suppose your pattern was different from your brother's, Jim? Doc Webster asked. I'm not sure, MacDonald repeated without looking up. Maybe the different heredity, maybe random chance. Perhaps, I put in. It was getting your first jolt so much younger than Paul did. Maybe the trauma hit you so young you hadn't come to accept limits on your mind yet, and your subconscious whipped up some kind of defense that lasted as long as the trauma did. Maybe so, said MacDonald, glancing up at me with hopeless eyes. But if it did, it's forgotten how to do it. No, it's forgotten how to do it again. And my conscience doesn't know the trick. He giggled. I haven't even improved on Paul's trick with the rock. His giggle dissolved into hysterical laughter. The table danced and his glass shattered on the floor. Callahan's broad hand caught him open palm across the cheek, rocking him in his chair. His laughter cut off, and his shoulders slumped for a second. Then he sat up very straight, stuck his hand out soberly. Callahan shook it gravely and produced a full glass of beer from nowhere. MacDonald took a grateful sip. I suppose I should say thank you. I needed that, mister. Um, Callahan told him his name. Mr. Callahan, but to tell you the truth, I almost think I'd rather do it myself. He looked around at the rest of us, and his face went all to pieces, and he buried his head in his arms. Ah, Jesus. Listen, Jim, Tommy Jansen spoke up quickly. What the hell did you do after that party? I mean, Dig, you couldn't stay at the school, right? Too many people flip you right out. Well, what did you do? Go home and become a loner like Paul? McDonald spoke listlessly. I tried, brother. I tried. I went home and told my father everything. Why his second wife had died, and what Paul was, and what I was. And that night he got up to get a drink of water and dropped dead in the bathroom. Thank God I didn't flash that. I got out fast after that. I got a flash of the man who ran the funeral home that almost did make me a murderer. So I took off and got myself the only job I was suited for. Lighthouse? Chuck Sam's guessed. Nope. No openings. There almost never are. But the Forestry Service can always use fire lookouts who don't mind isolation. Miles from anybody in a well-stocked cabin with nothing to do but watch the forest spread out below you. I even got lucky. The area I drew averaged 35 days of rain every summer. So I got to sleep late a lot. On hot days in Oregon, you get to stand a 12-hour shift. God, it was peaceful. It does sound peaceful. He was talking freely now. I think I got a flash from a bear once, but it must have been at the extreme limit of my range. Then one day I flashed a blue jay as it sailed about 6 feet over my head. And that was just beautiful. He shivered, almost worth the rest of it. What brings you this way? Callahan wanted to know. What else? The expected. A forest fire in my zone, called it in fast, and then got too close to a firefighter who was trapped by a widowmaker and roasting slowly. My boss figured me for an epileptic and fired me as gently as he could. I didn't argue the point. I had a little money saved up. I came back east. Why? Callahan asked. To see Paul. To visit him. Have you? No, damn it. I couldn't get near the place. I flew right into MacArthur, doped up with sleeping pills so I'd be asleep when we went over New York City, and rented a car with the last of my bankroll when I landed. I intended to drive on through and hope for the best, get halfway to Islip. I flashed a guy in the next lane. He was a drug dealer, heroin and cocaine. Tommy Jansen's face went hard as a rock, and he gripped his beer mug like a bludgeon. I was very, very lucky, McDonald continued. Any crash you walk away from is a good one, and that's what I did. Just left the wreck, married to a tree. Climbed up the embankment and walked away. I walked for hours. And not too long ago, the supervisor of this town, Ruin, drove past me in his big limousine and I flashed him. The next thing I knew, I was in there, talking a blue streak. Hey, how come you guys believe all this? We looked around at each other, shrugged. This here is Callahan's place. Fast Eddie tried to explain. Somehow, McDonald seemed to understand. Anyway, he sent on, that's the whole story. Kings Park is a long way from here, and frankly, gentlemen, I don't think I can make it any further. Any suggestions? There was a long silence. Fast Eddie opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and left it that way. Shorty scratched where it itched. Doc Webster sipped thoughtfully at his drink. I raked my brain. Callahan spoke. One. McDonald started, turned to face him. He looked Callahan up and down from his thinning red hair to his outsized brogans, and sat up a little straighter. I would very much like to hear it, Mr. Callahan. he said respectfully. Contact Paul from here, Callahan said flatly. McDonald shook his head violently. I can't. I told you. This thing can't be controlled, damn it. You said no, a little too loud, old son, Callahan grinned. Maybe you can't do it, but you think you can. McDonald shook his head again. No, I don't want to flash at him. Don't you understand? He's catatonic, a vegetable. I just want to see him and try and speak with him. Why use words? I asked. They're less dangerous, damn you, he snapped. If you fail with words, you can say to yourself, gee, that's sad, and go do something else. What else? Doc asked. What did you plan to do after you saw Paul? I don't know. Well then. Look, what could it possibly accomplish? McDonald barked. Maybe a lot, Callahan said quietly. Here's how I figure. Paul found a way to block the flashes out. A defense. But he found it at the end of his rope. So he just threw it up and slapped Ferocement over it. And he's been holding inside ever since. Callahan took the cigar out of his mouth and rubbed his granite jaw. Now, you're in sorry shape. But, old son, I don't judge you to be at the end of your rope yet. Paul was continuously telepathic by the time he killed his stepmother, wasn't he? Yes, I believe he was. McDonald admitted. He was thinking hard. Well, there you are. If you can reach him, remind him of what it's like to be hooked into reality without flashing. Maybe you can talk him into coming out from behind that shield and using it only when he needs it. In return, maybe he can teach you how to build the shield. What do you say, son? McDonald grimaced. I can't flash at will. The distance is too great. Our maximum fields of sensitivity don't reach each other by several miles. I'm not due to flash again for at least a day or two, and Paul doesn't flash anymore. All right, Callahan agreed. Those are the reasons why it can't possibly work. Now, why don't you try it? Because I'm afraid, damn it. Doc Webster spoke up softly. No reason to fret, son. We'll keep you from hurting yourself. McDonald looked around at us, started to speak, and paused. His eyes were terrible to see. That's not what scares me, he admitted at last, in a voice like murdered hope. What scares me is that I may establish contact with my brother and not be able to kill myself. Callahan lumbered around from behind the bar, brought his shotgun from beneath it, and laid it on the bar top. Son, he said firmly, I don't like violence in my joint, and suicide usually strikes me as a coward's solution. But if you need to die, I'll see that you do. A couple of jaws dropped, but nobody objected, except McDonald. What about the police? That's my problem, burglar. McDonald's eyes seemed to see a far place, and I hope to God I never see it myself. I suppose he was examining his guts. The suspense hung in the air like an electric calm before a cyclone, and nobody made a sound. After a long, timeless moment, he nodded faintly. All right, I'll try, Mr. Callahan. We relaxed a trifle in our chairs and then tensed right back up again. Callahan put out his cigar and laid a hand on that shotgun, unobtrusively waving Chuck and Noah out of the way, out of the line of fire. McDonald sat bolt upright, put his hands over his ears. He opened his eyes real wide, looked around one last time, and closed them tight, his brow knotted up. Now, I don't quite know how to explain just what happened next, because it doesn't seem to jibe with what Jim McDonald had told us. But I figure that if he was a telepath, Some of us at Callahan's are pretty fair empaths. Maybe he was tapping us himself. Maybe not. All I know for sure is that all at once the lights were gone, and I wasn't in the bar anymore. And Callahan and the Doc and Fast Eddie and Tommy and Long Drink and Noah and Shorty and Chuck and I were all crowded together somewhere, touching. Like we were rubbing shoulders in the back of a truck we had to push start. We didn't waste time wondering. We put our backs into it. That's crazy. There was no truck. Not even a hallucinatory one. But I guess it describes the sort of thing we did as well as words can. We pushed. And just like with a truck, there came a time when the thing we were pushing gave a hell of a shudder and took off, leaving us gasping far behind. The thing we were pushing was Jim McDonald. The lights came back and the familiar sights of Callahan's place came back, and I was alone in my skin again. Looking around at Callahan and the rest of the boys and realizing with surprise that I hadn't been the least bit scared. They were looking around too, and it was a few seconds before we saw McDonald. He was sitting rigid in his chair, trembling like a man with a killing fever. Doc Webster started for him like an overweight white corpuscle, but pulled up short and looked helpless. The air around McDonald's head seemed to shimmer like the air over a campfire, and we heard his teeth gnashing. Then, not suddenly, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, at first, he began to relax. Muscles on knotted, joints unlocked, his face began to soften. I don't know how to say this either. He wore his face differently. The McDonald he loosened into was changed, somehow older. He had won. Our deepest thanks, gentlemen, he said in a more resonant voice than he had used before. I think we'll be all right from here on. What will you do now? Callahan rapped, and I wondered at the cold still in his voice. McDonald considered for a moment. We're not really sure, he decided finally. But whatever we do, we hope we can find a way to help other people the way you've helped us. There must be a lot of things we can do. Maybe we'll finish school and become a psychiatrist like I planned once. Imagine, a telepathic head shrinker. Callahan's hand came away from the trigger of the scattergun for the first time. Jim Paul didn't catch it, but I did. I was rather glad to know that the intentions of the world's only two telepaths were benign myself. Callahan looked puzzled for a second, then his face split into a huge grin. Say, can I offer you fellas a drink? And McDonald's new voice echoed him perfectly. Don't mind if we do, he added, laughing, and got up to take a chair at the bar. Hey, Fast Eddie called out. Everyone to remember the important details. Wait a minute. The cops will be looking for yous for leaving that accident. What are you going to tell them? For that matter, how'd you get your utter body out of King's Park? Oh, I don't know, Callahan mused, putting a careful double shot of Shiva's Regal in front of McDonald. It seems to me a telepath could dodge him a lot of cops or a lot of witch doctors, wouldn't you say, gents? We guess so, McDonald allowed and drank up. And they were right, all three of them. I haven't heard much from either of the McDonald brothers yet, but then it hasn't been that long, and I'm sure they both got a lot of thinking and catching up to do. I wonder if either of them is thinking of having kids. One way or another, I expect to be hearing good things of them. Really good things. Any day now. It figures, I mean, two heads are better than one. And that's the end of Chapter 4 of Callahan's Crosstime Saloon. That's what we're going to call it tonight, kids. That was a good one. Chapter 5 coming up next week is called The Law of Conservation of Pain. It's an interesting title, isn't it? The Law of Conservation of Pain. Very interesting. It's a good story. I didn't really expect them to join in, to combine bodies and minds into one. That was kind of different. So it was. Callahan's Crosstime Saloon. I'll have to catch up and read the next chapter. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys, and listening to me read. I greatly appreciate you. Like I said, I will try and get the next chapter, the next video of the human origin of morals up and running. I've been on eBay. Well, I have a couple saved searches that I get emails on every day to see if there's anything new comes up. And one of them is the Little Blue Books, and one is Joseph McCabe. And I come across a seller that just has a shit ton of Joseph McCabe Little Blue Books, Big Blue Books. In fact, I think they have everything that Joseph McCabe ever wrote. But along with that, they have other Little Blue Books too. They have a website that catalogs every Little Blue Book that was published. And it's a pretty cool website. It's very basic, but it has a lot of information for Little Blue Books and the collection. Oh my goodness, in particular, one's written by Joseph McCabe. But I know if there's any that I need for my Little Blue Book collection, they have them. Every Joseph McCabe one that was ever printed, as far as I can tell. So, but yeah. All right, I'm done chit-chatting. I'm going to jump off here, guys. I might get on to play Diablo. I might do a chapter of Little Blue Book. I don't know. Please, if you're new, go subscribe to my YouTube channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And you can listen to me read all kinds of things to you. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming in. Love and appreciate you. I hope you have a good night, and I will see you next week. Peace out with sauerkraut.